I am not wont to do this, but I am rattled by the Charlie Kirk situation. Rattled, but not surprised. And amidst all of the horrific violence, the suffering and disintegration of people close to me, and the general atmosphere that a kind of societal reckoning is upon us, I feel compelled to give people a reason to hope. Because we are killing each other over ideas, and there appears to be no way to stop it. Because at the root of the modern West is a self-defeat that makes the chaos, suffering, and violence inevitable. And that no matter how noble our values may seem, liberty, freedom, it's all a mask, hiding the rot of our metaphysical dissociation from any kind of center around which we could orient, as opposed to unraveling. And when I use the term sacred, I know that for most people, it carries a sense of baggage, of a kind of heavy, stuffy, religious piety. But imagine there's a breaking news story. Wouldn't you want to find the most recent, up-to-date, and most authoritative source? That desire to be connected to the pulse, to what's most alive and real, that is a desire for the sacred. And this may sound silly, but the Super Bowl is sacred. Prom is sacred. The releases of each Harry Potter book? Sacred. That which punctuates ordinary life and causes you to organize around it, that which is most charged with existential relevance, these are echoes of the sacred. And that's what everyone wants, even atheists. And being oriented around that is to be centered, to be oriented as opposed to unraveling. Now, once I establish some context, I'm going to give you a condensed, play-by-play genealogy of the Western spiritual apocalypse. I'm going to show you how we got here. But hold on to this idea, because it will help you make sense of the seemingly disparate threads in this video. That my arm is only functional when it's connected to the rest of my body. If it were to be cut off, it would become lifeless. Charlie Kirk was a political commentator who would frequent college campuses to engage in discussion and debate. Political alignment aside, I'll leave it to the others to engage in the exhausting, obligatory social ritual of politicizing the issue and reacting with predictable platitudes and perspectives at varying levels of quality and insight. That this was horrific, that violence is unacceptable, that this is an assault on free speech, that let's get rid of the guns, that guns don't kill people, people kill people, that this is a mental health crisis, that our laws aren't strict enough, that Charlie did say that a certain number of gun deaths is acceptable for the sake of the Second Amendment, so maybe he deserved it, that he was a supporter of Israel's genocide, or that Israel killed Charlie because he was starting to criticize their actions in Palestine, that the deep state killed Charlie because it's a way to get to Trump, that Charlie said George Floyd was a scumbag, and he said other offensive, racist, and misogynistic things, or that the Democrats are the party of violence. It goes on and on. I'm not here to contribute to the grift and sophistry of what's become of the public discourse. And instead of descending into divisiveness and drowning in disillusionment, I want to do the opposite. I want to show how a way out of darkness may emerge by broadening the frame. But let's start with the most immediate of emotions. People are angry. And here's the thing about anger. Anger is only possible if we feel that we've been wronged. And that presumes some notion of goodness, some criterion of judgment. It is an act of discrimination to prefer being safe versus being unsafe. That I'd rather someone not break into my apartment than that they do break into my apartment. Goodness, the sacred, whatever you want to call it, provides vertical structure, hierarchy, priority. When we say that we prefer to protect children and not abuse them, we have some notion of goodness in mind. And not only that, but the nuances of a debate from the earliest days of psychology at the hands of Aristotle aside, The good is the great engine of desire. Everything we do, everything we want, it's all aimed at what we perceive to be goodness. And so whether it shows up in religion as God, or political ideology as liberty, or in wokeness as social justice, or veganism as health, some notion of goodness serves as an ordering principle, as the ultimate ideal that makes the whole value system intelligible. Now, this isn't to say that people have a working, conscious, rational, articulable understanding of goodness. No, people have an implicit, subconscious, unexplored relationship with the inner machinations of their own soul. As Plato discusses in First Alcibiades, when you were a kid and someone stole your toy, you felt wronged. But now that you're 40, you still have the same pre-reflexive, unexplored, uninvestigated perspective of justice. It's not that your intuition is wrong. It's just that maybe there's more to reality than our immediate assumptions and reactions. A part of my upcoming book explores the complete saga of humanity's metacognitive blindness, of why the unexamined life is not worth living. But for our purposes, it's enough to suggest that people are not conditioned for open discourse without getting offended. And let me, of all people, be the first to say that with certain exceptions, people should be able to say the most heinous, taboo, transgressive, and sacrilegious things imaginable. I won't even say should and project. I'll just be selfish and speak for myself. Historically, people like me get crucified and burnt at the stake. So I appreciate living in a country that at least pays lip service to protecting my proclivities. But let me also acknowledge that contrary to modern sentiment that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, that the pen is often mightier than the sword, and that words and ideas are more than mere phonetic or graphical gestures. And if we're not so modern that we've rejected metaphysics altogether, words are also more than mere reference to reality. And a part of my book will explore the different mutations of consciousness in which words have more cosmogonic force. But the point is that words are capable of violence, not the empirical, materialist kind, but psychological violence. And although you may be well-adjusted and content to live in an absurdist hellscape with no apparent meaning, some people are struggling, and their religion, political ideology, or whatever may be the only thing tethering their mind to sanity. Because ideas have existentially ordering power and provide maps of meaning that make life intelligible and not a chaotic mess. The default human posture is to fear the unknown. And to a mind that's not conditioned to entertaining an idea without accepting it, ideas can be disruptive. But the problem can't be localized to individuals because our whole society is a powder keg. We're at the point of such palpable tension where we're talking about literal civil war. We're killing each other, not over geopolitical or existential threats or access to resources. We're killing each other over ideas, or just internally snapping and senselessly killing each other, or killing each other from our own internal brokenness. Either way, the situation feels helpless, and no amount of dialogue seems to be able to bridge the gap to bring people to common ground in search of a solution. And it was all inevitable. For the sake of brevity, we'll only go back 4,000 years to the Middle Kingdom of ancient Egypt. Pharaohs were divine, but the people were not. And the people were beginning to want a role in eternity. The mythic centralization of immortality was unsustainable because the people wanted to participate in sacred structure, not just serve it. And so the cult of Osiris universalized the afterlife, creating a kind of metaphysical populism. Consider this one of the first steps toward equality. Hold on to that. The ancient world was one of cosmos, of an integrated whole. Reality had not yet been differentiated into different strata of being. And so the gods are what we call intramundane, in the world, embedded in the facets and functions of nature. Rain god, fertility goddess, volcano god. Speaking of which, the early Yahwists, or Jews, managed to compress sacred power into a transcendent moral will, Yahweh. And with Yahweh standing completely outside of creation, this effectively de-divinized the cosmos. It desacralized nature by making it a derivative act of creation. The early Yahwists wanted to stabilize the sacred and make it just. Similar to Hesiod in ancient Greece, lamenting the inequities of his personal spats with his greedy brother, wondering when the wicked would ever get their due. This desire for the divine to be rational, that if I obey God, I'm rewarded, and if I disobey God, I'm punished, was so that the divine was not something capricious, local, or superstitious. And so we began to purify the divine of its chthonic and feminine undertones. And when the earliest pre-Socratics, the Milesians, Thales, Anaximenes, sought to understand the world without recourse to mythology, they effectively demythologized the cosmos and gave birth to metaphysics. And so now reality was no longer a story to inhabit and in which to play a role in a cosmic drama. Reality became a structure amenable to intellectual abstraction. And when the poets and mystics from Sappho to Heraclitus and beyond discovered the soul as an ontologically distinct realm, we began to pull truth inward. The sacred is not out there, but within. And so the seeds of individual dignity and inner authority arise as every citizen becomes the bearer of reason, of the logos, of the principle that structures the world. Hence, democracy begins, not merely as populism, but as shared participation and order, that each individual was not a passive participant, but a co-articulator of reality. And speaking of the Logos, at the very moment of Jesus' death, as reported in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the veil in the temple was torn. We've bypassed the temple structure, and access to the sacred is no longer mediated by a priesthood, for we can know God personally. Salvation becomes internal by faith and grace, not ritual performance and purity. And so the human soul becomes the site of sacred encounters, echoing Parmenides. Fast forward to Martin Luther in the Protestant Reformation, and now the Bible is translated and accessible to the masses. Interpretation of the sacred becomes a private matter of individual conscience. This made it easy for the so-called Enlightenment to replace revelation altogether and put reason in its place. Truth becomes self-evident, and the individual becomes the moral and epistemic center. The individual is no longer ordered by a transcendent good. They are now autonomous, a self-governing, rational actor, perfectly prepared to be slotted into an Adam Smith Wealth of Nations capitalistic paradigm. And let's not get started on the cosmology of socialism. And so by the time of modernity, Nietzsche just comes out and says it. God is dead and we've killed him. We have psychoanalysts like Freud busy psychologizing transcendence, collapsing metaphysical and spiritual realities into psychological functions, that God is a projection of the Father, that religious longing is repressed infantile helplessness, that moral law is an internalized superego, that it's all just daddy issues, Meanwhile, Hegel is historicizing the absolute as if God is something that dialectically unfolds through time via an evolution of human consciousness and social structures, dissolving transcendence into a process that culminates with Hegel himself. God is history becoming conscious of itself through Hegel. And so is it any wonder that today we've become atomized? It started as a Protagorean relativism, that truth is subjective and perspectival. To each their own. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. No one has privileged access to the truth, and who are you to decide what's right and wrong? It sounds so tolerant and democratic. It's giving, let's all try to understand each other's point of view since we all see it differently. And modernity, of course, fetishizes the idea of hearing all sides, as if merely a multiplicity of external information will inevitably lead to the truth. But while people are ready to question the authority of others, how many are willing to turn inward and question their own epistemic authority? Why should what makes sense to you be valid? Are you even internally aligned in such a manner as to be receptive to truth, whatever that is? And I'll save the metacognitive treatise for my book, but once truth becomes contingent on individual perception, there's no higher order to adjudicate between conflicting truths. If everything is valid, how do you resolve inevitable conflicts? You may hope we could communicate, but communication from its Latin roots is to make common, to make public, which implies that there's a reality beyond myself in which others may mutually dwell. But modernity has decided that there is no external reality beyond individual perception, because if there was, it would collapse the entire multi-millennia project of transmuting each individual with their private delusions into demigods. To assert that perception is not equal to reality is to subordinate me to something beyond myself as an ordering principle. But again, we've spent the past several millennia alienating the individual from everything, and I say even themselves. And look, at every turn that brought us to this point, it was justified. And that's what makes it tragic. Desacralizing nature protected justice from the capriciousness of local gods. Demythologizing the cosmos made universal knowledge possible. Internalizing the sacred affirmed inner dignity and broke priestly monopoly. Privatizing conscience let people access the divine without gatekeepers. Grounding truth in reason tried to hold things together after theology shattered. The invention of rights was meant to prevent tyranny. And subjectivizing values seemed like the only way to coexist in a pluralistic society without violating the interior of others. But pay attention to the logic of this drive toward equality. We've been conditioned to think of equality as something good, and that's not without reason. But if we detangle equality from its conflations, that is to say, if we separate equality from things like giving due consideration for the dignity of others regardless of social status, we find that equality is a kind of negation of hierarchy, a lack of the kind of priority that gives a vertical structure to life and helps us discriminate that harming children is bad and not harming children is good. Pushed to its logical limit, true equality would be to privilege absolutely nothing, not even equality itself. And so all you're left with is horizontal flatness. And this is where the real devastation begins. If reality is always deferred to individual judgment, then I get to rule as an absolute tyrant, but only in my own mind. Outside of myself, I am powerless. Because if everyone's personal truth is valid, then who's to say that being fit is better than being fat? who's to say that slavery is wrong? If everyone's personal truth is valid, every perspective must be weighted equally, aka democracy. And so we live in an age of the least common denominator. So while on Twitter, Piers Morgan is tweeting angrily about the woke left, and some leftists on Twitter are basically celebrating that the shooter seems to be a straight conservative white guy, everyone is frothing at the mouth to have their side validated, because even though you're a dictator in your own mind, you need the external world to validate your truth. And you all think that with enough consensus, you all think that what? That the other side will relent and capitulate? That enough people will come together to collectively demonize an evil? The truth is far darker. I was on Barack Obama's Twitter reading what he said about the incident, and without much scrolling, I saw his tweet about the unimaginably horrifying August church shooting that took place in Minneapolis that left children dead and injured as they were praying. And every time, it's the same thing. Thoughts and prayers. But you don't believe in God, you only believe in yourself. The whole world could agree that there's a genocide going on, but it can't act. Because in a world of equality, eventually, not even the rabble of the masses gets its way. All that matters is who has the biggest stick. The Pythagorean relativism, which seems so harmless, that to each their own, leaves us with no way to adjudicate between conflicting truths. And for a while, we place our hope in the process of democracy. But at the base of modernity's logic is nothing but a Thrasymachiean solipsism, a Nietzschean will to power. There's nothing left but violence. You see, civil society wants to smooth over anything outward that might cause tension. As I was writing this video, I got a slap on the wrist at my IT job for labeling something testing nonsense in a development sandbox as a playful reminder to myself that the code could be deleted. Even in an absurdly low-stakes environment, the message is loud and clear. Please rename your creative placeholder to something appropriately inert. Please refrain from authenticity and channel your being through approved, desanctified forms. Please self-neuter and preemptively contain your playfulness in our dead code base. We're trying to sanitize society. But all that does is outsource the tension to within the individual where it rots and festers. What if I think that consuming animal products is a terrible desecration of life, but you see nothing wrong with it? Do I content myself to live a neutered life of pluralism? Or do I refuse to betray my deepest values and begin a jihadic crusade on behalf of the animals I love? But what happens when even language cannot serve as an appropriate release valve for the built-up pressure? Take a look at the field. Many will call for gun control. And sure, taking away the means by which so many of these atrocities happen makes sense at first glance. But that is where most people will stop, with their surface-level opinion that fails to dialectically integrate competing perspectives. Are you even hearing the other side? They're trying to point out that maybe it's not the best idea to centralize power and control into the hands of government officials, especially when the government's run by a bunch of corrupt, globalist, war-hawking pedophiles. But on the flip side, is the Second Amendment your God? Is the post-Enlightenment wisdom of America's founding fathers the ultimate sacred cow that can never be questioned just because you've turned Ben Franklin's quote into a platitude? That, quote, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. What about when he cautioned that Americans would receive, quote, a republic if you can keep it, and that, quote, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom? As a nation becomes corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. So read the room. How is everyone? People are awash in eroding gender relations, tensions around immigration, and most of the developed world is having a cultural identity crisis. People are being radicalized and factioning into tribalism. And I just spent $3.50 on a single avocado. And maybe people will say, guns don't kill people, people kill people. The guy was a nut job. But blaming this on the mental health crisis, while partially valid, is partially just a cope that confuses proximate causes with ultimate causes. It's an attempt to localize dysfunction entirely within the individual, to pretend that the toxic thread is isolated and not interwoven within a broader context. And this should remind you of how modern medicine manages disease, often addressing acute symptoms, hacking at the branches, not the root. And so where does this leave us? Well, not only does an arm cease to be functional if it's cut off from the body, it begins to die. We tend to think of ourselves as independently existing entities, looking at reality from the outside in. But reality is not some abstraction outside of yourself, nor are you merely located within reality. No, you are reality, a node of reality. But it doesn't end there, for your participation in reality is not reducible to being part of a homogenized genus. There are levels, there is structure, and there's something at the center of reality, of yourself, that might be touched if you are willing to walk the path. You are not the ground of your own being. You are not a self-caused creation of your own doing. You are connected to something. And this isn't an argument for God via efficient or agent cause, at least not the God you're used to. For what happens when it feels like God himself is silent, and that no matter how hard we cling to inherited symbolic orders for solace, we feel ill-prepared for our impending reckoning? I've written a work, The 4 Horsemen of Inner Apocalypse, and it will be on this channel soon. The world needs a voice. People need someone who can not merely hear the other side, but who can inhabit all sides as a native and yet see beyond them. If you're still here, and if my words found resonance, find the key in the description of this video, and I'll leave it up to you what you do with it. Oh, and who am I? Let's just say that I'm some psychagogue.